Bob Hope was a genuine titan of entertainment, a man whose name remains practically synonymous with the history of modern show business. No one in that history has ever crafted a career quite like his. Whether it was the sheer length of his time in the public eye, the high quality of his performances, the originality he brought to each of his roles, or the astonishing variety of his talents, Bob Hope stands firmly as a true one-of-a-kind legend. Yet as remarkable as his journey was, spanning decades and transcending multiple eras of entertainment, his final days proved difficult in a manner that underscored how immense his life's accomplishments truly were. The greater the pinnacle, the more poignant the final descent. In the last decade of Bob Hope's life, friends, colleagues, and fans witnessed a once sharp wit and seemingly ageless performer come face to face with the inevitable aging process. His story remains both inspirational and heart-wrenching, illuminating the fragility of even the brightest stars. In this comprehensive look back, we will delve deep into every corner of his storied career, from its earliest beginnings in the vaudeville circuit to the golden age of radio and film, his countless tours entertaining the troops overseas, and all the way to his challenging final decade. We will also explore related facets of his life not always spotlighted, adding layers of context to paint a more vivid picture of Bob Hope's legacy and the cultural environment that shaped him. A one-of-a-kind legend. No one in the history of show business has ever had a career like Bob Hope. From his early beginnings, right after arriving in the United States, he showcased a flair for comedic timing, dancing, and even singing that eventually carried him into vaudeville, radio, film, and television. This all-around versatility, combined with his relentless work ethic, made him into a ubiquitous presence. It is genuinely difficult to find another entertainer who successfully matched Hope's longevity, output, or breadth of creative expression. He practically defined the notion of an all-purpose show business star, able to host, perform, act, sing, and dance, all the while maintaining a distinct comedic persona. But as sad as it may sound, the greater the career, the more painful the twilight years can become. Bob Hope's final days were challenging, and perhaps even more so precisely because of the greatness of the man himself. The higher the platform from which one descends, the more dramatic that descent appears. In his last decade, Hope deteriorated in front of an audience that had grown to see him as a timeless figure, someone who might never yield to the normal ravages of time. Observers, including longtime friends and collaborators, found themselves confronting the sobering reality that Bob Hope was in fact human. There was a certain tragedy in watching him grapple with fading vision, faltering hearing, in the gradual decline of the quick comedic reflexes that had enthralled fans for decades. Yet beneath that sadness lay a profound respect for the man and the immense contributions he made over the course of nearly a century. By exploring how he coped with these struggles, how the public and the media responded, and how his family supported him, we gain a fuller understanding of the luminous legacy he left behind. In the process of recounting those later years, we can also look back on what truly made him special in the first place. His comedic artistry, pioneering style, unwavering patriotism, philanthropic efforts, personal warmth, and unflagging energy in the spotlight. An unprecedented career. Bob Hope was born on May 29, 1903. Though often seen as an all-American personality, he was in fact a British-American performer whose parents moved him to the United States when he was just a young child. Specifically, he was born in the Eltham district of southeast London. Arriving in the United States at age 4, he grew up near Cleveland, Ohio, and quickly demonstrated an affinity for entertaining. In a sense, that background encapsulates Bob Hope's entire persona. He was part English, part American, possessed of a worldly sense of humor that transcended national boundaries and had a natural ability to connect with ordinary people through jokes, gags, dance steps, and song. Over time, he would become one of the best-known entertainers on the planet, bridging generational gaps and forging new pathways in comedy. His career spanned nearly 80 years, an astounding figure by any show business standard. Hope began cutting his teeth as a vaudevillian, perfecting the comedic timing and stage presence that would later serve him so well in movies, television, and radio. Over the course of his career, he appeared in more than 70 short and feature films. 54 of those films featured Hope as the star, a testament to both his star power and the consistent demand for his comedic style. Classic works such as his Road to Toot series, with Bing Crosby and Dorothy Lamour, remain favorites for film aficionados studying the evolution of comedic duos and trios in Hollywood. Hope's light-hearted interplay with Crosby, marked by ad-libs, self-deprecation, and a playful rivalry, became a template for comedic partnerships for decades to come. In addition to his film work, Bob Hope hosted the Academy Awards an unprecedented 19 times. No other performer has come close to matching that record. The sheer scale of hosting the Oscars so many times speaks to his versatile ability to connect with Hollywood's elite, as well as millions of viewers at home. His comedic monologues often set the tone for the evening and were frequently filled with topical humor, gently ribbing the celebrities in attendance without alienating them. This balancing act requires immense comedic skill, being just provocative enough to spark laughter, but not so biting as to offend an audience that included the biggest stars in the world. Hope deftly walked that line year after year, building a persona that was universally appealing. Still, Bob Hope's endeavors did not stop at film and hosting gigs. He appeared in numerous stage productions, honed his craft in radio shows when that was the major form of mass entertainment, and later transitioned seamlessly into television roles. That was no small feat. Many vaudeville and radio stars struggled to adapt to the new medium of TV. Hope took to it like a natural, appearing in countless television specials that became must-see programming. He also wrote 14 books demonstrating his ability to translate his comedic perspective and life experiences into written form, giving fans another dimension through which to appreciate his prolific career. The song Thanks for the Memory, composed by Ralph Ranger with lyrics by Leo Robin, became his signature tune, one that he introduced in the 1938 film The Big Broadcast of 1938. That number helped define his on-screen persona, sentimental, witty, gently teasing, and engaging. Off-screen, Hope possessed a competitive side and tried his hand at being an athlete. In the late 1910s, he had a brief career as a boxer, though that never achieved the heights of his subsequent comedic endeavors. For audiences, however, it underscored his willingness to push boundaries and throw himself into new ventures, a trait that would shape his entertainment career as he fearlessly pursued every format he could. Bob Hope began his professional show business journey in the early 1920s as both a comedian and a dancer on the vaudeville circuit. Vaudeville was a proving ground for so many legendary stars of that era, a place where comedic timing had to be refined in front of live audiences who could quickly turn on an act if it did not deliver. Hope took those lessons and built upon them when he transitioned to Broadway. By 1934, he was appearing on radio and in films. He quickly became known for his excellent comedic timing, specializing in one-liners and a rapid-fire style of delivery that left audiences breathless with laughter. Many of these jokes were self-deprecating, a style that ironically helped endear him to millions, since he seemed so approachable and unpretentious. Moreover, Hope played a massive role in establishing modern American stand-up comedy. Prior to him, comedic routines often relied heavily on slapstick or structured comedic dialogues. Hope, on the other hand, championed the monologue style, delivering jokes in a quick cadence, directly addressing the audience, and employing topical humor about current events. This approach has become the standard for late-night talk show hosts and many stand-up comedians to this day. The fact that he started out in vaudeville, then moved into radio, then soared in Hollywood, and became a television staple, illustrates just how flexible and enduring his comedic persona was. Between 1941 and 1991, Bob Hope conducted 57 tours for the United Service Organizations, USO. These tours took him to military bases around the world, where he entertained active-duty American military personnel. During the World War II, he traveled to far-flung places like Europe, North Africa, and the South Pacific to bring American troops a few hours of comedy, music, and respite from the horrors of war. His dedication continued during the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and even into the conflicts of the 1980s. The public's perception of Hope as America's entertainer was closely tied to these tireless tours. Soldiers and civilians alike appreciated that Bob Hope risked traveling into dangerous zones to bring a taste of home to troops stationed abroad. This commitment cemented his place in American cultural history, transforming him from a mere Hollywood star into a beloved patriotic figure. He also appeared in numerous television specials for NBC across his career, often featuring glamorous guest stars and comedic sketches that drew huge viewership. Ever the innovator, Hope was one of the first major entertainers to use cue cards extensively, helping him deliver his rapid-fire jokes with precision. By 1997, having spent decades performing for millions, Bob Hope retired from public life, a sudden deterioration. As the 1980s drew to a close, Bob Hope began to show his age in ways that startled those who knew him best. Part of the shock stemmed from the fact that he had always seemed so ageless, moving from stage to screen to USO tours with boundless energy. He appeared to defy the aging process for so long that many believed he might go on forever, delivering his classic quips with that signature grin. But the changes came swiftly, turning the man who had seemed 15 years younger than his actual age into someone who now reflected his status as an octogenarian. The mental acuity that had been his hallmark began to fail him, which manifested most prominently when he started forgetting the lines of routines he had performed for decades. On stage, Hope had always exhibited a near-flawless memory for jokes. He would reel them off in perfect sequence, adjusting on the fly if a line fell flat. The first signs of trouble came when he could no longer recall exactly where he was in his act. To hide this confusion, he would lean over to whisper to his longtime pianist and music arranger, Jeff Clarkson, asking which joke or story was supposed to come next. Though Clarkson's assistance allowed Hope to keep the show going, fans who knew his style intimately began to notice subtle breaks in his timing. Hope's performances grew shorter, more abbreviated, as if they could no longer hold the comedic arcs that once came naturally to him. He also started taking questions from the audience to fill the gaps, a technique that might have worked if his hearing had not also been declining. Not only was it difficult for him to recall comedic lines, but he often couldn't quite catch what people were saying to him, which created awkward moments. Promoters who had booked Bob Hope for substantial sums, somewhere between $50,000 and $80,000, grew alarmed when they realized they were not getting the polished shows of old. They occasionally demanded refunds, an unprecedented situation for an entertainer who had long commanded top dollar. This unfortunate turn of events effectively put an end to Bob Hope's live performing career, a facet of show business he had always cherished most. Fans, of course, felt sorrow at seeing their beloved idol struggle. Friends and collaborators felt powerless to stop time from exacting its toll on the man they revered. His once razor-sharp memory, sense of comedic rhythm, and ease on stage were now compromised. Yet even in these difficult moments, Bob Hope showed glimpses of the humor and resilience that made him famous. He continued to attempt comedic improvisations and relied on loyal supporters like Clarkson, as well as other longtime members of his team, to keep him afloat on stage as long as possible. Failing sight and hearing. One of the most daunting challenges for Bob Hope was the failure of his eyesight, an issue that dated back to 1963. That year, on a movie set, someone carelessly discharged a prop pistol too close to Hope's face, causing corneal blood clots and putting the vision in his left eye at risk. He received laser treatment, which helped to some extent, but he ultimately compensated by over-relying on his right eye for nearly 3 decades. The physical strain of this imbalance eventually clouded his right eye, placing him in an even more precarious situation as he moved into old age. Simultaneously, his hearing began to fail. It happened so gradually that it was perhaps less obvious to outsiders at first. But over time, friends, family, and fellow performers realized he could no longer hear essential cues or musical tracks while performing. Musical director Bob Alberti would sometimes kneel just below the camera's line of vision to help him maintain a steady tempo when singing or dancing. Audience members and television viewers likely did not perceive this subtle arrangement, but it was indicative of how carefully Hope's team tried to uphold the illusion of normalcy. The older he grew, the more he stumbled over lines, slurred words, or abruptly halted mid-sentence when he lost track of the cue cards. Performing, which had for so many decades been a source of joy, now carried an undercurrent of fear for Bob Hope. He was fully aware that his eyes could no longer clearly make out the script or the audience's faces, and that his ears might betray him at any moment, causing him to miss a punchline or a question from the crowd. For a performer of Hope's stature, whose livelihood and self-identity revolved around direct engagement with an audience, this situation was more than just a physical hardship. It was an emotional blow as well. Yet he soldiered on for as long as he could, drawing on that reservoir of resilience and professional discipline that had taken him to the top. With his productions increasingly compromised by his own health problems, viewers began to witness those cracks in the facade. While some fans found it heartbreaking, others simply felt grateful that Bob Hope continued to appear at all. Indeed, part of his enduring reputation stemmed from that spirit of perseverance, the same spirit that had driven him to perform for troops in war zones under difficult conditions. Struggles during productions. By 1990, Bob Hope's declining faculties began to overshadow the comedic magic he once wielded so easily. During the taping of a sketch set in Sherwood Forest, Hope played the Sheriff of Nottingham, opposite Tom Arnold's Robin Hood, and Roseanne Barr's Maid Marian. When the moment came for Hope's big entrance, he shouted, "Why am I carrying this bow?" at a nearby producer. It was an innocent but telling question. He had forgotten the archery tournament that was supposed to conclude the sketch. A critical element of the scene, ever quick on his feet, he attempted to cover by joking that he needed more rehearsal time. On another occasion, Barbara Bush volunteered to read him his lines when he could not see the cue cards. In a different scenario, an interview with sportscaster Bob Costas had to be scrapped because Hope's hearing difficulties rendered him unable to respond properly to the questions. Such incidents illustrate how even the best-laid plans of producers and directors could go awry once Hope's physical limitations took center stage. Yet friends and colleagues universally describe these moments with a sort of tender respect, noting how valiantly Hope tried to keep the show going, refusing to surrender to infirmity until it was absolutely necessary. For fans who grew up watching Bob Hope effortlessly banter with political figures and celebrities, or who remembered him cracking jokes on the deck of an aircraft carrier for uniformed troops, these new struggles felt surreal. This was the man who could seemingly improvise comedic patter on command, who had coasted through live events with ease, and who boasted an encyclopedic memory for comedic gags collected over decades. But time, as it must, caught up with him, and these production struggles represented a final chapter of his career, one that was tinged with sorrow, respect, and nostalgia. Final specials and declining appearances. Bob Hope's final special as the main host aired on May 17, 1992. The production team working alongside him was fully aware that he was in physical discomfort. Although he attempted to mask his struggles on camera, it was becoming clearer by the day that his legendary run was drawing to a close. In 1993, NBC honored him with a 3-hour special called Bob Hope, The First 90 Years, hosted by none other than Johnny Carson, who himself had retired the year before from The Tonight Show. During that tribute, Hope's role was noticeably diminished. He primarily sat and applauded the acts that came to pay homage to him, including comedy icons George Burns and Milton Berle, actress Angela Lansbury, comedic star Whoopi Goldberg, actor Chevy Chase, and broadcaster Walter Cronkite. In many ways, this homage was like a living funeral for Bob Hope's television persona, a moment for the industry and the public to show gratitude and reflect upon all he had achieved. Everyone hoped that this special would represent Bob Hope's formal farewell to the small screen, a dignified finale to an exceptional career in broadcasting. Nonetheless, in 1993 and 1994, NBC aired several more specials featuring clips from Hope's past shows. By that time, Hope could no longer walk without assistance. Whenever he was on camera, he was either seated or supported by a guest on his arm. These appearances felt bittersweet as fans tuned in to see glimpses of the comedic giant they remembered, even if it was clear that new content from Hope himself was virtually impossible. There was an understandable reluctance on NBC's part to fully retire their most iconic star. For 50 years, Bob Hope had reigned as the network's longest-running radio and television presence. Fearing potential public backlash if they simply phased him out, NBC allowed him to continue making occasional on-screen appearances. Meanwhile, public relations professionals, like Ward Grant, tried to quell rumors that Hope was close to death. The entertainment world was not quite prepared to let him go, even as the signs of decline grew more overt. On July 30th, 1996, the tabloid magazine Star published a cover photo of a frail Bob Hope, emblazoned with the headline, "Bob Hope Tragedy. He's gone blind, deaf, and needs your prayers." The story sent a jolt through fans across the country who had seen less and less of Hope in recent years, but perhaps had not grasped the full severity of his condition. A longtime friend declared that those closest to Hope felt he might be running out of time. Yet, in typical Bob Hope fashion, he soldiered on. At long last, Hope's final television special, Laughing with the Presidents, was billed as his definitive farewell to NBC. The network spared no expense in promoting it, taking out full-page ads to let the world know this would be a memorable goodbye. It aired on November 23, 1996, and by then, Hope's abilities as a performer had diminished so drastically that the special proved a heartbreaking watch. The comedic timing, the energy, the sense of fun that had been a hallmark of his earlier specials None of it was possible anymore in a coherent way. Some called it mortifying. Others watched it with a kind of reverence, aware that even if Bob Hope was not the man he once was, he still deserved gratitude for a lifetime of laughter. His last public outing. In the summer of 1998, a special occasion arose that briefly lured Bob Hope out into a public event, the 75th birthday party of Barney McNulty, the inventor of cue cards for television. McNulty was a key figure in Hope's career, as cue cards had become critical tools to help the comedian deliver his famously rapid-fire jokes on live TV for many years. Many of McNulty's friends, colleagues, and admirers attended the celebration. Among them, actress Angela Lansbury, who had previously collaborated with Hope on an episode of Murder. She wrote, "This gathering proved to be the final time that most people outside his intimate circle ever saw Bob Hope. By then he was 95 years old and required round-the-clock assistance. He stayed for only about an hour and a half before leaving. As he departed, he waved weakly from the window of a van, while Barney McNulty ran alongside, calling out his thanks. It was a poignant moment, emblematic of the transition from the robust comedic force of old to a frail, elderly man, winding down a life that had been lived in the brightest of spotlights. Many who were present at that gathering would later say that, despite his clear physical limitations, there remained in Hope's eyes a spark of appreciation and warmth. For decades, he had used McNulty's cue cards to keep his comedic timing sharp on national television. Now, on McNulty's birthday, their professional relationship came full circle. It was a reminder of how Hope's personal and professional worlds frequently intersected, forging bonds that lasted for years, even decades, in an industry where ephemeral collaborations are the norm. Honors and recognition. Even as Bob Hope receded from public life, the accolades continued to pour in, reflecting the cultural esteem in which he was held. The Air Force named one of its new C-17 bombers the Spirit of Bob Hope, a nod to the countless hours he spent boosting the morale of American airmen around the world. The Navy also honored him by christening a ship, the USNS Bob Hope, in recognition of his contributions to the welfare and morale of the troops over so many decades. These gestures from the military were far from empty tributes. They underscored how integral Hope's comedic performances and heartfelt presence had been to the armed forces during times of war and conflict. In October 1997, President Bill Clinton signed a bill making Bob Hope an honorary veteran of the United States Armed Forces, the first time in the nation's history that any individual entertainer received such an acknowledgement. Hope had essentially spent half a century traveling to remote, often perilous, corners of the globe to uplift soldiers with jokes, music, and the comforting presence of celebrity guests, including glamorous Hollywood starlets who served as pin-up icons. Many veterans would later recall how important his visits were to their morale, how hearing him wisecrack about the conditions or tell jokes at the expense of the commanding officers made the trials of deployment more bearable. This honorary veteran status encapsulated how Hope's comedic work was more than just entertainment. It was a service. To millions, he was the face of home, representing the comfort, humor, and normalcy of American life, even when experienced thousands of miles away in a tent or a makeshift barracks. Hope's name will always be woven into the broader tapestry of how America supported its troops overseas, not just with supplies and equipment, but also with a piece of cultural identity and shared laughter. Passing and memorial. Bob Hope passed away on July 27, 2003, at the age of 100. The very fact that he reached the century mark felt fitting for a man whose life often seemed larger than life itself. He had spanned most of the 20th century, beginning in an era of horse-drawn carriages and traveling vaudeville troupes, and ending in a new millennium defined by the internet and digital technology. In between, he left a unique, indelible imprint on virtually every corner of entertainment culture. A memorial high mass was celebrated at St. Charles Borromeo, a church located just a few blocks from Hope's longtime residence. He had helped build that church, reflecting his philanthropic spirit and deep roots in the community. Friends, family, neighbors, and fans paid their respects, many choosing to share anecdotes of his warmth, generosity, and comedic brilliance. Soon after, a memorial tribute took place at the Academy of Television, Arts and Sciences in North Hollywood, where Hope had been honored many times before during his active years. This gathering was filled with heartfelt remembrances from Hope's friends and professional colleagues, each one reflecting on a different facet of his sprawling career. For those who remembered Bob Hope in his prime, dashing off jokes under hot spotlights before massive crowds, or striding across a war-torn airfield to greet soldiers with a reassuring grin, his passing felt like the end of an era. The world of comedy, particularly the variety show tradition that thrived in the mid-20th century, would never be quite the same. Younger generations might recognize him as a historical figure, but for the generations who lived through his peak years, Hope represented a kind of comedic continuity that spanned from the Great Depression to the dawn of the 21st century. Final words and legacy. Bob Hope's last words, delivered in trademark comedic fashion, underscored the quick wit that had endeared him to millions for decades. When his wife Dolores asked where he wanted to be buried, he replied, "Surprise me." That quip was classic Hope, light-hearted, a bit mischievous, and designed to spark laughter at a moment that might otherwise have been solemn or gloomy. It was also a summation of how he viewed life, always ready with a punchline, always eager to diffuse tension with humor, and always aware of how fleeting our time can be. The question of what Bob Hope will ultimately be remembered for is a rich topic. Some point to his acting career, recalling timeless comedic roles, particularly in the road to movies that paired him with Bing Crosby and Dorothy Lamour. Others note his stand-up comedy, especially the iconic sets he performed on television for decades, or the big stage extravaganzas that saw him banter with presidents, starlets, and fellow comedians. Another group highlights his quick wit, his ability to crack a joke about anything and anyone, including himself, a trait that modern late-night hosts strive to emulate. Yet beyond his entertainment legacy, Bob Hope will also be remembered for his extraordinary commitment to the USO and the broader sense of goodwill he fostered between entertainers and the American military. He was a cultural ambassador, bridging the gap between Hollywood glamour and the gritty reality of overseas deployment. His presence in war zones reassured servicemen and women that they were not forgotten, that the folks back home remembered their sacrifices. Even away from the spotlight, Hope's philanthropic spirit, involvement in charity golf tournaments, support for churches and community initiatives, and the way he encouraged up-and-coming comedians all speak to a legacy broader than just comedic talent. He helped pave the way for philanthropic events that tied entertainment to charitable efforts, setting a precedent for modern celebrity-driven philanthropy. When reflecting on Bob Hope's entire career arc, from the early days in the vaudeville circuit, to his commanding presence on radio, film, and television, to the difficult final years marked by failing health, it is impossible not to feel a deep respect for the scope of his accomplishments. He adapted to nearly every transformative shift in entertainment, from the silent film era to the color television age. He brought joy to millions, even in times of war and profound social upheaval. He hosted the Oscars more times than any other entertainer in history, demonstrating a comedic agility that could address Hollywood egos without alienating them. And in his personal life, he showed remarkable devotion to those who served, traveling across continents to bring them a taste of laughter. In a way, Bob Hope's story also mirrors the broader story of 20th century America. He was an immigrant who came to the country as a young boy, grew up in a working-class environment near Cleveland, and made himself into one of the most famous personalities of his era. He championed optimism, patriotic service, and the power of entertainment to unite people across boundaries of class, geography, and background. That combination of humor, ambition, and civic-mindedness resonates strongly within American cultural mythology. Additionally, Hope's comedic style paved the way for future stand-up comedians and late-night hosts. His rapid-fire one-liners and monologues heavily influenced Johnny Carson, who would later become the king of late-night television, as well as the comedic sensibilities of Jay Leno, David Letterman, and even present-day hosts like Jimmy Fallon or Stephen Colbert. Hope taught the entertainment world that a monologue could be fresh, topical, and personal. A conversation with the audience rather than a rehearsed routine delivered from behind a rigid fourth wall. Expanding on aspects not fully detailed in the original text, it is worth mentioning that Bob Hope collaborated with numerous Hollywood legends beyond Bing Crosby. He worked with Lucille Ball, famously cameoed in various comedic sketches, and appeared in star-studded extravaganzas featuring the era's biggest names. He was known for pulling comedic pranks both on-screen and backstage, but also for the respect he commanded. Many of Hollywood's prominent figures felt privileged to appear on his specials, which served as a kind of comedic variety tradition where stars from different corners of entertainment converged. There were times when Hope's conservative politics and unwavering support for the U.S. military put him at odds with the growing anti-war sentiment during the Vietnam War. However, he attempted to keep his humor inclusive, reaching out even to those who disagreed with his political stances. This capacity to remain beloved despite controversies speaks to his personal warmth and comedic adaptability. Over time, even critics who questioned his political views could not deny the sincerity of his efforts to entertain troops or the enormous body of comedic work he had amassed. In his personal life, Bob Hope was known to be a consummate professional, sometimes demanding but usually fair, and deeply appreciative of loyal colleagues who worked behind the scenes. Such loyalty was reciprocated. Figures like Jeff Clarkson stuck with him through his final years, reflecting the bond that can form when a performer becomes a pop culture institution. Moreover, Hope's charities, including his extensive work raising funds through celebrity golf tournaments, have had a significant impact on communities around the country, supporting various causes that range from medical research to children's education. Hope's comedic persona was carefully crafted. He often played the cowardly wise guy who found himself in over his head, especially in the movies with Bing Crosby. Yet the man behind that persona was exceptionally determined, always seeking new avenues for entertainment and never content to rest on his laurels. He was known to work with some of the best writers in the business, ensuring that his jokes stayed sharp and relevant. The words, "What else have you got?" were apparently common in the Hope writing rooms, hinting at his desire to refine material until it reached the comedic apex. During the final years of his life, as recounted earlier, the breakdown of his health created a sense of bittersweet reflection among fans and peers. Everyone had grown so accustomed to Bob Hope functioning as an unstoppable comedic force that seeing him struggle with everyday tasks or hearing that he was losing both sight and hearing, felt deeply unsettling. It served as a reminder that even the most iconic figures are not immune to the realities of aging. His final appearances on television, shaky though they were, nonetheless fulfilled a sentimental role for those who loved him. They allowed millions to say goodbye in a gradual, if painful way, rather than all at once. By the time Hope passed away in July 2003, he had become something akin to a national treasure, a presence whose comedic commentary had carried the nation through multiple wars, changing social tides, and huge shifts in entertainment technology. From black and white radio broadcasts in the 1930s, to vibrant televised specials in the 1960s, to cameo appearances in the 1980s and 1990s, Hope adjusted his performance style to match the changing times. Such adaptability is rare, even among the greatest entertainers. In that sense, Bob Hope's life story also highlights the evolution of American show business in the 20th century, from the variety circuits of vaudeville to the multi-channel TV-driven entertainment landscape of the modern era. When at last the tributes poured in after his death, they came not just from comedians, actors, and producers, but from politicians, military leaders, and everyday Americans who had grown up watching him. President George W. Bush honored him, as did former presidents and countless other